I was in Miami and I overdosed on cocaine. And like I had completely throttled myself on the drug, like completely, to the point where like my heart was beating extremely hard and I was sweating, but I was freezing cold. I was throwing up, blood was pouring out of my nose. Like I passed out in a restaurant, borderline as bad as it could possibly get without me being either dead or in a hospital bed. And
3-time HYROX world champion with a high energy, jock-like character, which is how you see this man online. But in this conversation, we got a different side of the world champ, unpacking his rebellious childhood, going in and out of rehab centers, breaking any rule he could, and to see where he was to how far he has come is nothing short of inspiring. Our guest today is the one and only Hunter McIntyre. You were getting expelled and hopping around different schools like drip heaps throughout your teens.
in probably like an 18-month period, I got arrested 3 times and many of them were felonies. Looking back, like none of them were bad. Like I wasn't robbing banks, they were like pranks. By the time I had gone through this whole process, the system had really done a bad job at trying to harness the character that I was. They didn't even look at me as a person. They just looked at me as a problem. It wasn't until I valued something more than that for the first time ever in my life that it all changed. And from that point on, I vowed to myself, I was like either world champion or world-class drug doer.
Talk to me about when things all changed.
That could be such a long story, but I'll try to give you the abbreviated version. So
I was in Tasmania over New Year's. I took like a week off everything and stayed in a little hut on a lake, like a lake house, and stayed there for a week with my best friend off social media, and just like over New Year's, we spent New Year's
epic.
doing that. It was sick. It was funny. We were like, fuck, bro, we need to work hard so we can do more of this. It's like, we need to work hard.
That's what I was trying to tell you though earlier, where I was like, I went into the woods to go think about it. And I was like, am I really going to work so hard to make so much money just to try to pay to do what I was doing before, just to own the time that I had before?
What woods?
Remember I was telling you, a couple years ago, I went on a hike and I was thinking to myself, I was like, I know that in the next couple years, like next year, I could 300% what I'm earning right now.
Mm.
And I could be on the jets with my friends and I could have the place on the point with them. And, you know, all of a sudden I sat there with myself, and when my friends were making all this money, they were trying to do what I was already doing, and they were having to pay so much more for it because they basically had the overhead of everything that they had built. And while they were there, they were stressing about the emails that they hadn't checked and everything like that. So that was one of those kind of things where I was like, just be careful. Don't build up that overhead where all of a sudden you feel guilty when you're not doing the thing that you just spent so much money on.
So then what's the solution to that then? Obviously not building up the overhead, but like, what are we striving towards then if we can live in the bush and do the things on a lower level, or at least just like with a less risk or less to worry about?
Well, it's the difference between being mission-oriented and then in like object-oriented.
Right. So not being object-oriented, but being mission-oriented is probably the goal then.
Yeah. I mean, then all of a sudden there is no object that you're thinking of because the mission's so great. And then the other thing is like, if you don't want to be that kind of person where it's that freedom, you just be really careful. You're very conservative about being able to understand how you displace yourself. It's like if you put so much of your weight in the camp of growth, but all of a sudden you have no freedom, it's you have to choose. Mm. It's a poison you have to be willing to drink every single day.
Did you realize that when you put too much in the pool, in the bucket of growth?
Totally. Last year I took on investor money. I took on big sponsorship, all this kind of stuff. So I wrote in my journal, and I'm not a journal guy. I wrote in my journal 2 years ago, I had finished world championships. I was like, I have no girlfriend. I don't have a ton of money. I don't have a big house. I don't have anything. And then all of a sudden I got home from that trip and I'd won the world title, dominated everybody. And then I got home from that trip and I basically was like, well, now I have all this money and I kind of have all these things going on. I was like, why don't I sign this big contract, get the money, get the big house in Malibu, get myself a girlfriend, get all this stuff. And I get investors for your businesses that everyone's so excited about. I got all these things. I got all the things that are on the opposite side of the page that I wrote I didn't have. And then I lost the thing that I originally had that was so valuable to me. So it's like, you just got to be careful. You know, you don't sign a lease on something you don't really want to have.
I think that was an interesting thing that you said at the cafe just before, because you're like, there's 2 things you can do when you move to Austin. You can go there, get a big house, sign a big lease, employ a few people, build out all of this stuff, and then you're kind of tied there. Or you can go there, get a studio apartment, use your friend's space, and have the flexibility. So when one of your guests gets you a ticket to somewhere or for a week, or you can say yes and you can have a bit more flexibility. Are you kind of living in that lens in your life, just trying to be a bit more fluid and not be tied down to places? Is that how you're trying to live?
Well, totally. That's why I'm here now. Last year, I couldn't have. It was too much mental pressure. I couldn't get up from my desk because all of a sudden I assumed that because I had taken money and I'd bought all this product and I'd got this place, I was like, why am I leaving something that's costing me X a day just to conserve? And now I'm out here and I don't think about it at all.
Yeah. So the problem is if you're in that lens, you can't even enjoy the holidays that you take because you're too busy worried about it. And then that's tying into the very start of the conversation when you've got your mates going over on the private jets, but they're trying to ski, but all they're thinking about is the emails they've got to respond to.
Yeah, dude, don't become that person.
It's the irony of this. It's like we work so hard so that we can work less. We do so much so we can do so little.
Yeah. I'll admit, I'm trying to live the Peter Pan life as long as I can. The thing that I also noticed that was kind of a tragedy is like after COVID, there was this big split. All of us kind of like got hit and the chink got in everybody's armor because all of a sudden the world stopped. And when you're moving so fast, you don't pay attention to the details of it all, the minute details that maybe like, would make you a little bit more scared about the speed that you're going at. And all of a sudden everyone had to slow down and all of my friends immediately grew up. We were all traveling the world, adventuring, absolute freedom, always chasing our dreams. And then all of a sudden when the dreams weren't available to us anymore, we had to start to look and be like, well, what would life really be like if I can't do this anymore? Do I have to grow up? Do I have to do this? Do I have to do that? And I watched my friends in the past 3 years, they all quit sport. They got married. They did these things. I went to their weddings. I went and I hung out with them just recently. I'd fly over, see how they're doing. Lost it. It was like someone unplugged them. And I was like, oh shit. And not like I don't want to get married. I don't want to do all of those things. It's just like you got to be really, really careful that you don't lose that capacity. Like I'm going to try to be forever young. I've got this one great mentor guy. I call him Crazy Bobby. He lives on the same property that I do. 61 years old, has the same energy as us, the same physique as us, never grew up. Super successful. He just never allowed someone to flip that switch for him that said all of a sudden now because you're in this role, you have to act like this.
So do you think that there's people get in this state of fear or they feel obliged to live a certain way? And so when things like COVID happen, they go, oh, okay, it's definitely time to grow up now. We need to get married. We need to have kids and do this, like live this path. Is there a pressure that people feel to do that? Or why are you kind of like, I'm just fascinated by you wanting to stay young for as long as possible because I love that idea and everyone wants to feel young.
Yeah.
But then you also don't want to get later on in life and be like, fuck, like some of the things that a lot of older people really value, like family and grandkids and all of that, like become part of their life. If someone comes up, they don't have it. Like, do you ever get those concerns or?
Not really. I mean, the fortunate opportunity that we have is you and I could have kids at 80.
Yeah.
So like I'm not missing out on anything. I'm a big believer in chapters. Like I am currently, like if you hear about the stories of this, there's like the pupil, the warrior, the master, the guru. Like I'm currently in my warrior state. Like I absorbed things when I was younger. I saw a lot. I heard a lot. Then all of a sudden you gather some information, you take action. I'm in my action state. Like I really need to take action to continue to feel and absorb and grow as a person. And I haven't spent all that yet. I'm still in that phase where traveling around the world and competing is still a gigantic piece of my like growth as a human being. Some people may be done with it earlier on. Some people when they left high school, they stopped completely. Some people went on to college and continued to develop it. And then some people decide to go pro afterwards. And like, I'm kind of in just like that Tom Brady mode where like, I'm not going to put the football down until I know it's time.
You know what I also think about that, which is great, is when you mentally switch out from being young, you probably start to get old as well.
Yeah, dude.
And so it's like you literally are going to be old when you surrender to the fact that you're getting old.
Yeah.
And so the more you can think that you're young, the younger you'll probably be. And that's why like you get to your age and you're barely peaking. It's like you got plenty of youth in you, plenty of like aliveness. When you said before when COVID hit, people got like I think you said a clink in their armor. What do you mean? Chink in their armor. What do you mean by that?
I think there was before COVID and there's now. I think everybody was on a magic carpet ride before COVID where there was this like opportunity where people were never really thinking about like their position in the global state of everything. They're just like, yeah, I'm here. And all of a sudden you're just like, but it's a very fragile place to be here. If overnight, let's just say a flu comes in that makes people very sick, here it doesn't exist anymore. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, what? Another one could come? The economy could drop. I could lose my job. I can't travel anymore. Like that could all just snap. And I don't know, the first time you ever hear about boxers, the first time they really get knocked out, they have a really hard time getting back in the ring again because they have that fear. They have the glass chin now. I think a lot of people ended up with that kind of metaphorical glass chin after they all of a sudden got scared. It was something I told you earlier where all of a sudden when I went through it, I personally was like, I need to harden the fuck up. Like I need to start my own businesses. It's the reason why I started the companies I own now is because all of a sudden I lost everything. And then it transformed me a bit. But then all of a sudden, as I was transforming, I got the clarity of not wanting to become the person that was eventually going to, become manifested through the circumstances I was having. And I went back to I regressed, went back to more of a young state of mind. But a lot of people didn't. A lot of people have not changed back. And I mean, whatever, that's kind of evolving. But
do you think that, because when we're younger, we have less concerns, less worries about life, I think because we haven't experienced as much, we kind of have a bit more of a playful outlook on life.
All gas, no brakes, dude.
Exactly right. And I think ultimately we all want to have less worries and less concerns in our life.
Yep.
And so the younger version of ourselves has that. The older version of us obviously gains a lot more wisdom and we start like learning new things and start like developing our own opinions on life. But I think ultimately if we can have this like wiseness about us, have depth, but then also be really playful and young.
Yeah.
It's got to be the key. Have you thought about this? Because since I've met you and the first time I saw you at all was when you were speaking, when Ollie, you spoke up and did the Q&A thing.
Yeah.
And I just saw this like playfulness where you like cared so much, but you didn't give a fuck at the same time. And it was like this really cool thing where it was like blunt answers, but not blunt in the sense that you were being rude. It was like just being like not sugarcoating things, not fluffing it, just saying it how it is. And it was a really cool nature. But like, I look at someone that has that and I go like, fuck, you've got to kind of have gone on this journey where you've experienced hardships, kind of gone over them. And then now they don't phase you as much for you to be so direct.
I mean, it still hits, dude. Like I lost my world title this past year and I hadn't lost in 3 years. And like that shook me for a second. It took me a while to come out of it. And you have to just keep on having these things that kind of really rock your foundation. Otherwise, you're really not going to grow that much. Like I was listening to Sting from the Police talking about how as an artist, I may have been Sting, but basically, as an artist, you have to put yourself in a position where you're like always kind of risking it. Like if you get comfortable, you're going to lose that inspiration. And if you're not out in like the depths of the water where you can't fully touch your toes to the ground, you're going to lose that kind of inspiration. And so that's why in my athletic career, I don't think I've ever stayed in one place for too long because I always wanted to be challenged. Like a handful of years ago, I used to be one of the best guys in the world at Spartan Race. That wasn't good enough. So then I went to Tough Mudder. That wasn't good enough. Then I went to the CrossFit Games. That wasn't my thing. Then I went to HYROX and then I quit HYROX and decided to go towards Olympic paddling. And I just wanted to keep on being like, what's going to shake me next? And it definitely made me a very, very hard competitor. And I think maybe because I had just done HYROX so hard for the past 3 years, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be like a total novice again, to get my ass kicked, to get throttled. And once you kind of get up and like the blood kind of dries up, you just say, hey, fuck it, I'm back in.
Is it kind of like making sure that you constantly have a fire up your ass to push? Because if you get comfortable, you're winning 3 years in a row, it's like, oh, this is easy sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you got to. Like, I mean, listen, like it's the same way you're probably going to do the same thing by going to Austin. You're comfortable in this room. and you're comfortable, you're the big dog, and then all of a sudden you're going to go to Austin, you're going to be down on the low on the totem pole. You're going to have to climb up. You're going to have to gain people's respect. You're going to have to really, really hustle and grind again to get people's attention. And same exact thing for me. Like, you're only as good as your last win. I haven't won in 2 races. I hadn't lost in 3 years before. So it's one of those kind of things where now all of a sudden there's this weight on my back. Every single day when I wake up, it's a heavy weight. It's a heavy weight. The cover of my phone is quotes from athletes saying that they're better than me. And I don't let myself get out of bed without a little bit of fear. I love living in that place of fear, and it's what keeps me going.
What do you think, like, when you say it keeps you going, like, what do you think it makes you do? Does it make you, like, push that little bit extra in the training or show up, or how does it give you more drive?
I mean, I'm sure it all comes from, like, some root of being, like, spooked as a kid by something like that. I'm sure we all have something like that. But, I mean, when you're going to the track and it's, like, that last rep, why do it? Why do it? Well, because your competition is. When you're putting another plate on the bar, why do it? Because your competition is. And why does it matter? If you're beating your competition, it doesn't matter. But if they just beat you, you have to step up. You have to. And like, I think all these things, like sport is a beautiful thing because it's very applicable to other aspects of life because you're constantly measuring yourself. You have to, if it's a really high level athlete, you have to measure yourself all the time. You have to be accountable. You have to really be able to be raw with yourself. Like every single time you race, even as a world champion and world record holder, I could see how my squats didn't nail them. Like I didn't nail them this time. How my runs were sloppy 3 through 5. And even a world record for me is not enough. And like I sit down, I write everything down. I hold myself accountable to such a crazy standard to the point where it's like in most rooms I sit down with people, it's not even worth talking to them about it because they could never really understand what I'm saying. And it's the same way I'm sure like if you sat down with Stephen King and you asked him about a story, he couldn't really explain it to you. He's like, just read the book when it's done because what's in my head right now, you'll never understand.
Yeah, and I guess that what's interesting about that is finding rooms of people that understand it, or is it more so just realizing that it's a bit more of a solo journey? Because for you, what you said, like one of the questions I asked you on that Q&A was how much of being a world champ's mental, and you said all of it.
Yeah.
And then you proceeded to talk about how being in rooms with people that are pushing you and like doing the work when no one's watching in a sense. Like you were like, okay, if I don't see you running out on this track while I'm here on the Gold Coast, like you're not going anywhere sort of thing. And it's like, I think it's this like winner mentality where it's not about like, you're not comparing yourself to all the people in HYROX. You're comparing yourself to all the athletes in the world. And then a byproduct of like being at the level of them, not just in the sport of HYROX, you become the best person in HYROX.
Yeah.
It's like making sure that you're in like you're the worst in the room in a sense. And that's maybe why you go into these different sports, would you say?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of these kind of things where if you're in a room and everybody admires you, you're probably in the wrong room. And it's like kind of like that hunger mentality where if you're an entrepreneur, you're probably skinny. If you're a billionaire, you're probably fat. That's why, Elon Musk has got a gut. But in reality, it's like, it's one of these kind of things where you have to be in a place where you're always kind of shook a little bit. And I learned that really young. And just like being around my brothers, I could be the best athlete. None of them gave me any street cred because they could beat the shit out of me. They didn't care the fact that I just won a race or I was the best wrestler in my school because they could crush me. And they could crush me. And it was one of these kind of things where being around 3 older brothers, that there was constantly this pecking order where in reality, I was only good as I was in that moment, not what I had done before. So I learned it young. And it really just made the biggest difference in my life where I wasn't really fighting for, what was behind me. I was always fighting for what's ahead of me.
What was it like being the youngest?
It was awesome. I mean, I had a really good life. Don't get me wrong. I learned lessons very early on because I had older brothers that had already done everything. It was one of these kind of things where I expedited the process of just maturing as a young man. Because if I was in a house full of just like sisters, like they just wouldn't experience what I would. I had not necessarily aggression, but masculine type characters around me all the time. So everything was kind of built around that ego, that attitude of just like, hey guys, we're not going to like play cards. We're going to go in the backyard and play paintball. We're not going to play dollhouse. We're going to go wrestle. You know, it was one of all these kind of things where everything was a little bit more competitive. Everything was very, very goal-oriented, point-oriented. And it just created this character where everything for me was about gaining points. And that was the only way where I could really see my pecking order amongst the guys. Being the youngest especially, though, was like, it's impossible to gain points on them. So I just always had this very aggressive, methodical attitude towards competing against them.
You said would you say you still are in that lens of like playing in a game where you're trying to gain points? Hey, it is Monday morning, and you know what that means. It means I just received my Papa Macros delivery for the week, and Papa Macros has been an absolute game changer, and let me tell you why. I've just increased this show to 2 episodes every single week. So to put into context, we're releasing a cinema production with a new guest every 3 days, and I'm still training every single day and striving towards marathons and HYROX prep. So to stay on top of my health and fitness whilst fitting in this busy schedule that I have, Papa Macros has been a game changer for me because it's allowing me to have nutritious, delicious, and more importantly, convenient meals at my doorstep every week so I can stay on top of my health and also achieve all the goals that I'm striving towards. If you guys are time poor or you want to get on top of your health and fitness, Papa Macros is going to be a game changer for you as well. So you can go to the link in the description or the show notes below, or go to papamacros.com.au and you can use code Chris Griffin and you'll get 10% off for life on any Papa Macros order that you make. Once again, go to link in the description below and use code Chris Griffin for 10% off your entire order. Stay on top of your health and use Papa Macros today. How fortunate are we to take control of our health? We have the opportunity in this world to prioritize our health. And one of the things that I do to prioritize my health is I use this thing that is on my wrist called a Whoop. It's a game changer and it's my best friend when it comes to achieving my health and fitness goals. There's a couple of things that I like to use with the Whoop. So I'm not bombarding you with all of the benefits that this thing on my wrist does, but I like to track my sleep and more importantly, my restorative sleep, my deep and REM sleep. I change different things in my modalities and my routines to improve those numbers, ultimately resulting in me feeling better throughout my days. If you guys want to take control of your health and fitness, you can go to join.whoop.com/Chris and I will give you a free Whoop and a band for 1 month. So you can try out Whoop completely free. And if you do not love it, you can send it back, no dramas, risk free. So go to the link in the description of the show notes below or go to join.whoop.com/Chris and I'm going to give you a free month subscription and a Whoop band completely free. Let's get right back to this episode. You said would you say you still are in that lens of like playing in a game where you're trying to gain points?
Yeah, man, but that's kind of life. Like, it's supposed to be fun. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure like even you and your business and your strategy, like you see an episode, you see the points, it's the views.
Yeah.
And like, I think like whenever I go do speaking engagements, I tell people how fitness and competition is such a beautiful thing because it's so easy to really notch which direction you're going in as far as progress or regression. Because if you're taking a second off your mile, that's progress. If you're taking adding a pound or taking a pound off the scale, that's progress. If you're adding a pound on the plate, that's progress. To me, it's an addiction. It was an addiction that I probably replaced with the problems that I used to have with drugs and things like that. But it's one of these kind of things where it's universal. Everywhere I can go, I can always apply myself in some way, shape, or form. And like, I think humans, for the most part, are designed to work that way. And I think sometimes people lose it, at least. But I think the reason why HYROX is so successful is what I call a 1, 2, 3 kind of sport. 1, do you do HYROX? Yes or no? 2, what's your category? Pro or open or whatever. 3, what's your time? It's very analytical. It's very measurable. It's very applicable. So I immediately can know if you tell me that, yeah, you do it. 2, you're open, and what's your time? Like now immediately I can be like, well, I do the same category, but I'm a little faster. And it's not like I want to have an ego over you, but people just can't help themselves. There's just this vanity amongst the whole approach. It's the same thing when you go into a gym with guys. It's like, how much do you bench? It's kind of like what I was telling you earlier about like the belt system inside of a dojo. It's this beautiful thing. And it's like, even if you're not competing against everybody else, you can always have this measurable thing where if growth exists within you, if you're improving.
Yeah, yeah, it does. And I want to talk about HYROX a bit more and your space in that. But I reckon just before we do that, I think we go back to teenage Hunter and look at the little Hunter and see how he was growing up as a kid in New York, and obviously quite a sporty upbringing, jock of the school, I would assume. Talk to me about your teenage years.
To be honest, I was never the best at anything. I was best in my school, but at the same time, like that's best in your school. There's another one right down the street, and that's not that big of a deal. So when I graduated high school, I was, very low level grades, and I was like a moderate level athlete, even on a state level, not a national level. Like my name would never even pop up. Now I'm a 10-time world champion, but you would never look at those predictors and say, well, he's going to become this. I did always get the most potential award saying like, hey man, like if you really tried, you'd become something. But at the time I didn't get it. I always just would take the award and I would laugh and go back down and take my seat. My parents, it was kind of one of those things where it was like, you should do sports. And I was like, why? And they're like, because we said so. And it was much like school. Like I was like, you need to do your schoolwork. And I'm like, why? And they're like, because we said so. And with like my rebellious kind of attitude and my lifestyle, like I never cared. Like if you told me to do something, the likelihood I would do it is probably 100% less likely because you asked me to. If you told me, you're like, Hunter, you shouldn't do that. I'm like, well, why shouldn't I? And then I would be more likely to do it. So no one was really good with the reverse psychology with me. If I look back, that was a huge flaw of my parents. But, you show up to wrestling practice just because I was a rambunctious kid, 3 older brothers. Yeah, sure, I was good because I got beat up a lot at home. And I just had to use that torque on other people. As far as running went, yeah, I was just a kid who ran around the woods all the time. So yeah, you put me on a track and make me run next to other kids through the woods, I'll probably beat them. But the difference is in what you see now and then is like there's this person now that understands the magnitude of attention to detail and focus and repetition, where now it's this transformative thing where it's like almost like a drug, where I can see almost like, I don't know if you've seen Dragon Ball Z where they make the transformations and stuff. Like I can see that happen throughout my season to becoming this incredible, like larger than life, mythical kind of thing at the end of the full transformation. But as a kid, none of that was shown to me, explained to me. Like no one was ever trying to tell me the value of hard work. It took a very, very long time. And until one very unique experience when I was older, where I understood why hard work was even important. But if you looked at me in high school, dude, always in trouble, always in the dean's office, getting suspended, expelled, you'd look at me more as a problem child. And what has happened now is I think I just refined that energy.
Do you think a big driver for playing sports was girls?
Dude, like girls are addicting. Like, just as well as I do, you see a beautiful girl walk in front of you. It's one of the most primal energies you can ever feel. Like a Ferrari could drive by me and I'd be like, wow. But if a hot girl walks by me, like something moves in my body. Like it's like a cellular thing. That wasn't really, like we loved them when we were in high school, but at the same time, it wasn't that big of a motivation. I don't think girls became a motivation to me until probably in like my early 20s, like where all of a sudden I realized when I was such a small kid, like I didn't really get as much attention as I do now. But once I became like a bigger guy, like did stuff like modeling and things like that, and you started to get the attention of girls, you could realize that kind of effect. You're like, whoa. And now I would say it's definitely something I keep in check, where I'm just like, just because you feel something doesn't mean you need to take action on it. But as a kid, definitely like it's hard to create those boundaries.
Yeah. So you were getting expelled and hopping around different schools, like heaps throughout your teens.
Yeah.
Just like not lasting very long in one, having to move to another one. How did that all look like?
Dude, it's difficult to like explain because it makes people look bad in the process of it. But if I had to be real, I would even say it to my parents. I think they did a bad job. I think my parents had a lack of responsibility. Like I think they both cared enormously, but they had a lack of responsibility and accountability in the way that I was acting. And they let the school and the reprimanding like services take too much accountability in the way that I was going to turn out. So when I would get in trouble, I would get like suspended or go to detention. Like they'd be like, oh, Hunter's there again. And like I'd get yelled at a little bit home, but there was never like an actionable next step. Like, how do we defeat this behavior? It was just always, you're punished now. So punishment is not necessarily like it's not rehabilitating somebody. I think they realize that in prisons now. It's like, you can't just put somebody in a box for 10 years and expect that they're going to be rehabilitated.
Teach them.
Yeah. So think about that on a very young level. Somebody who's very immature and can't really understand.
Underdeveloped.
Yeah, just underdeveloped, not really understanding everything that I'm kind of going through. Not like it was confusing and miserable, but sure, there was a window open in the classroom and I would jump outside of it and run around the building and try to get back into my seat before the teacher found out. The teacher catches me, I get sent to the dean's office. They're like, Hunter, you know you can't do that. And I'm like, but why? Because the payoff was massive. Everyone in the class started laughing. It was awesome. Or I have this just sit there in the class and watch my teacher write numbers on the wall. I was like, which one has a higher payoff? So I couldn't really see the difference. And eventually, you know, the reprimanding became more and more intense. I started to go from summer school to military school. I started to go from like, you know, getting in detention into now getting arrested. And then all of a sudden going to rehab, and like everything kind of intensified. Interestingly enough, like as time went on, it was like kind of like this crescendo. It continued to grow and grow and grow. For some reason, nothing that we were doing nipped it in the butt whatsoever. And I was also like heavily medicated. They were giving me every single kind of drug you can imagine, where it was bipolar medication, tranquilizers, ADHD medication, and they kept on applying more and more weight to it, but it never got better. It was almost like breaking the system. And looking back now, like I can honestly say it was just like such a bad idea. Like you can't just give a young little kid all of these kind of drugs and keep on pushing him and putting him in more and more difficult situations. Like when I went to military school, this is so crazy. Like I went from this very prim and proper school where there was no problems, there was no fights, there was nothing. It was such like a pussy school in comparison to me going to military school where it was like half blacks, half whites. And it was not even like race wars because we didn't like each other. It was just like you just paired up with each other and then you went to war at night. And it was just extremes. It was extremes to the point where like looking back now, I'm like, how the hell did I get out of there? And it just kept on going that direction to the point where it ultimately was like in probably like an 18-month period, I got arrested 3 times and many of them were felonies. And looking back, like none of them were bad. Like I wasn't robbing banks. They were like pranks. But the judges looked at the pieces of paper and they were like, a smart judge would look and say, hey, this kid pulled a fire alarm. Was the building on fire? Was this going on? Did he steal anything? Like, no. Clearly, a young man pulled a fire alarm. What's the outcome? Just like what I said earlier. I jump out the window. I do something. Everybody laughs. There's an outcome. Like I get that kind of reward. I pulled a fire alarm. Same exact thing. It's a bigger scale, obviously, but is it to the magnitude where this person needs to potentially go spend jail time? No. So by the time I had gone through this whole process, the system had really done a bad job at trying to harness the character that I was. They didn't even look at me as a person. They just looked at me as a problem. And ultimately, it wasn't until I had grown up and had escaped the system and they were no longer had so many touch points on me that I was able to finally stand on my own 2 feet and create this system, which eventually would become somebody who owns multiple international businesses and is considered one of the greatest athletes of his time. I had to take accountability for myself because other people weren't. They were just putting me through this grinder and being like, hopefully he makes it out on the other side.
So you were quite rebellious. And as you're explaining here, the things just it was the same reaction you were chasing, but the things just kept getting more severe.
Yeah.
Was there ever a point where like it clicked to you and you're like, oh fuck, this isn't actually a joke anymore? Or was it always just a joke to do all of these things? Because if you're starting getting arrested, moved to more severe different places like the military schools and the rehabs, and then you said you hopped around different rehabs as well. Like was there ever a point where you're like, fuck, I need to actually switch on, like change something here, like something's wrong, or you didn't think you were doing anything wrong?
It wasn't until I was 23, but I'll explain it to you like this. Like if we went out and got super banged up tonight, we got super drunk, we'd wake up the next morning with a hangover and we'd feel the sense of regret. Like, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Like, God, I'm such an idiot, man. Like I don't know why I do that. And then all of a sudden, a couple days later, the hangover's totally gone. And Friday's coming up again. You're like, fuck, we're going to do it again, dude.
Yeah.
It's going to be sick. The babes are out. Like, fucking, I'm going to call the boys. And it was the same exact thing. Like, eventually the hangover of the bad behavior would subside, and all of a sudden that feeling again of being like, well, you know, why not?
I'm still alive. Nothing. Like I made it out all good.
Yeah. Yeah. So it wasn't until I had now started sports, and there was nothing that I had really ever valued. This is, I think, was a big part of the problem, where I said accountability. Like, people hadn't created a value system in me where I was looking at things as being more valuable than the actions that I were taking. So it was a risk of losing it potentially. So now I had started my professional running career, and I had been running for about 6 months. And, you know, I'd done some significant things, but I hadn't gone up against significant competition. And I went to my first ever championship. And the week before, I was in Miami and I overdosed on cocaine. And like, I had completely throttled myself on the drug, like completely, to the point where like my heart was beating extremely hard and I was sweating, but I was freezing cold. I was throwing up, blood was pouring out of my nose. Like, I passed out in a restaurant with throw up all over the ground in front of all these people. Like, it was borderline as bad as it could possibly get without me being either dead or in a hospital bed. And, you know, even after that, I was like, well, that fucking sucked. But if you'd called me the next weekend and I didn't have a race, I probably would have done it again. I now was a week out. I overdosed. I flew back from Miami completely just shook. Like, I was in bandages basically from how bad it was. And the next week I had my first championship against the 2 prior world champions of the sport. And it was a Navy Federal Credit Union race where the cash prizes were big. And I went out hard, and I was racing against the 2 prior world champions, and I was right next to them. I was like, these guys don't even know who I am. And I'm up against them, pushing them. But I could feel like there was a pain in my heart. Like, I felt like something was going to tear. And eventually the race got finished. One guy beat me by 3 minutes. Another guy beat me by just under a minute. And I finished third. So now I'm on the podium just behind the 2 prior world champions. And I just was sitting with myself and I was like, holy shit, man. Like, you could have beat the 2 prior world champions, a brand new athlete. And the only reason why you didn't, now I can't guarantee that I would have won, but the major reason why you wouldn't have is that you were just out partying on drugs the week before, and these guys clearly are not. These were 2 Mormon men who had families and jobs and respectable aspects of life that I was not abiding by at all. You know, I'm taking the money that I have left to my name and getting flights to go places where people would give me free drugs. That was the lifestyle I was living. And sure, Monday through Friday, I was working hard as hell, putting in the work in, but it was the weekends that were tearing me apart. Likelihood that I would have died, over a dozen of my friends are dead now, is high. And it wasn't until I valued something more than that for the first time ever in my life that it all changed. And from that point on, I vowed to myself, I was like, either world champion or world-class drug doer, like, you know, wild boy. And sure, since then, I've like dabbled. Like, I'm not going to pretend to anybody that I've just been this person that only drinks water and goes to church on Sundays. Like, I have a life that I enjoy. I take care of myself. I'm respectable. Like, I've got my shit together. I certainly go out and enjoy myself from time to time, but it's nothing like what it was before. Because as I said to you, your values change. And all of a sudden, like, the story doesn't ring as loud in your head. It doesn't feel as fun to laugh about at the table the next day. It eventually just became like, I was like, wow, like, when I feel these feelings, they're just dead. It's unplugged. I don't get anything from it anymore.
So you said over a dozen of your friends have died.
So many.
From drugs.
Yeah. I mean, my first friend overdosed when I was 19. Second one, same exact year. 3 or 4 within the year of that. Some of them are still dying now. It's such a hard thing to shake. Like, in the way that, as I said, like, if your values are not aligned, like, there's no reason. Like, I've injected heroin. There is nothing better than the entire world than heroin. Really isn't. There's nothing that I've felt in my entire life that's ever made me feel like that. And I threw up for like the whole 4 hours that I was high on it. And every time I threw up, it was even better than the last one. It was just fucking electric. And it's so hard. Like, if you think about it, like, a bag of heroin maybe cost you $20, $30, you know, for a dose. To be able to make $20, $30 right now is not difficult. I could sell my shoes. I could go on the street and beg for an hour. It's not that difficult to be able to show up to what I'm doing every single day and travel the world internationally and beat everybody else in the world in the fastest growing sport. That's a challenge. That's an insane juggling act of intensity, timing, mentality, or you sit on the couch and you get banged up on drugs for $20. And that's probably better. But this whole juggling act and all the insanity of what it takes to be called a world champion or set a world record to me is just so worth the risk of all that insanity that it feels better than the drug now.
So you've been in that state. So is that why you understand when people are in that state? And also like being in that position, how like is it quite a hard thing to get out of? Like, can you just make a decision and move on, or was there like some addictive things that had challenges for you to actually move on from? Maybe it wasn't an addiction, but an extreme use of drugs. Because your friends that have died, they probably would have been addicted, right? Like fully.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it ends up happening, unfortunately, where they try to kick it and then they come back and they try to do what they did before. So like if I tried to do any of the drugs that I was doing at the level that I was when I was in my early 20s, like it would destroy me. And, you know, you just get used to it. Same exact thing. If I took 6 months off of training and I showed up and did effort that I did while I was in world championship shape, it would destroy me. And that's usually how these guys die. I mean, in reality, dude, like I'm never going to fully understand what other people are going through. I've been there myself. I had my reasons for doing it and trying to impress upon people that, it's a difficult place to stand from. I definitely want to go back at a certain point in my life and be able to try to be a impactful person for people like that, because I went through that without a lot of people to hold on to. I definitely want to stand from a place of security and made it through my whole life to have enough to give back to those guys. Like, as I said, I'm still kind of in my warrior phase where I'm growing, but once you kind of get into that master and guru phase where a master is somebody who's educating and teaching, and a guru is just a state of being that's almost more impactful than trying to teach. And I still need to go through those phases to fully understand how I can give back to these kind of people. But I can honestly say that's one of the most important things to me that I've ever really started to feel as I matured through this space, is that at first I was there and I ran away from there. Then I was there and I realized I was there. Then I'm at where I am now, and I want to go back, but be on the other side of the fence and try to help bring people over. And because you just don't realize how crazy it was until all of a sudden you get that 10,000 foot view and you're like, fuck, dude. And there's so many people going through that. And there's not a lot of people who are aligned with fully understanding them and making sure that they get out.
So when you look back at that journey then, can you pinpoint exactly how it led to that extremity? Like, can you pinpoint exactly how it is? Because what's going on in my mind is, yeah, there's going on and standing on the other side of the fence of the people that are fully in the mud. But like, where's the root cause that's gatewaying to get them to that point in the first place? I would imagine it wouldn't be all sunshine and rainbows and the next minute addicted to heroin. I would imagine there's a massive process that leads them to there, would you say?
It's almost like what's going on right now, what you see with HYROX. Like, people like to exercise a little bit, then they go to their first one, and then they qualify for world championships. Now they're going to worlds. Like, it just keeps on like boom, 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 boom. And next thing you know, these people are like, quit their jobs and are like, I'm going full-time pro. And it's like, is it the irresponsible decision to do? Probably, but they don't know anything else. They're so in. They're so bought in. Like, all of us have, like they say, it's a gateway drug, all that kind of stuff. There's this kind of thing where all of a sudden, where if you saw yourself on the first day of it versus the last day of it, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, it's a totally different experience. And for myself, as I said, I tried to kind of give you the window of time. Like, the first thing I started to do that would give me attention was jumping out of the window and then running around the school, which is super harmless. But I no longer felt it anymore from that. So it needed to continue to grow. It needed to be crazier. It needed to be like, that's why to feel something now, I need to go do like an Ironman or an ultra. Like, I need to go into the depths. and like feeling so awful and so vulnerable and so crazy are some of my fondest moments in my entire life, because it was earth-shattering and I still made it.
Yeah, I love how you compare things to like positive things in life. So like I'm talking about the progression to get addicted to heroin, and you're saying it's the same as someone getting addicted to anything like HYROX or training or becoming a certain person in their life. So it all starts with one little thing.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of gets progressively more extreme, I guess you could say. Do you think there's a negative? I mean, obviously there's a negative, but when you look at it and you're saying, for me to feel that thing, that's quite an addictive feeling. The most fondest memories are these extremes. You need to go through something that's even more extreme than what you've experienced before. Do you ever think like there's like where's the line? Do you ever think about that?
Well, there's certainly people, and I don't want to end up here, and I'm not going to mention names because I don't think it's helpful, but there's these people that never grow out of it, and some people look up to them, but I don't, because I know what they're doing, where they can't help themselves. They have to keep on doing more. And they're saying it like they're telling people that they're going on this journey, but they're not going on a journey. They're just sticking a bigger gauge needle into their arm and dumping more drugs. And they're doing it through the lens of what we see as like positive and incredible. But I'm like, dude, this is incredibly self-destructive behavior. Like, you have to take yourself to the edge of death to feel anything anymore. And all of us read these guys' books and we're like, that's so fucking hard. Yes, I want that. And you don't realize how insane that person really is. And being that I've been there and I still kind of am there, it's a crazy place to be. And like, what you need to be as a person at that point is like in that position is you need to be able to reflect and catch yourself in it. It's like, I say this a lot because it took me a while to realize that we all have loops. And we go on these loops, and sometimes it's really tight, and then you kind of get away from that behavior. You kind of make it a little bit longer. You keep making it a little bit longer. But it's like a person in the woods who gets lost. They keep on going out on a different path, but they end up back in the same place because they're not really holding themselves accountable and really having perspective of where they're at and really holding themselves to the ground. Because when they catch that emotion, that feeling start to come again, you have to let it come up. And before it takes you like a wave, you need to find a way to dodge it. And the reality is I think for me, a big part of my growth as a human being is when I start a family, it's like the addiction to watching myself go through these things is going to need to be translated into watching my kids go through it. Not into the detriment of their own existence, but more so being like, Hunter, like, you've gone through that now, and now you need to take your lessons in life and be able to help other people. It's much like I was just saying, like, eventually I'll go to the other side of the fence and pull people through. And that will be my new version of feeling it. But you'll have so much context and so much understanding of what those people are going through. It's effective. And like, you reliving it in some kind of way, shape, or form is kind of cathartic. But I can tell you right now, most world champions are truly, truly mentally torn people.
I cannot agree with you more in this. I've been thinking about this concept a lot. People, I've been trying to think of it, and as you're explaining this, I feel like I've come up with a little conclusion to what it is. We're pausing the show for just 1 minute. I am not in the attire that I normally record podcasts in, and that is because I'm about to go to the gym. And when I go to the gym, I wear nothing but Gymshark. I absolutely love these guys. And if you've not heard of Gymshark, you're probably living under a rock. And that's because they are the leaders in the world, and they have been for such time now. I only wear the blue one because it brings out my eyes. That is a joke. Chris, shut up. These clothing is amazing. They feel so good. If you guys want to try out any of Gymshark products, you can go to the link in the description or the show notes below. And if you use code Chris Griffin, you'll get 10% off your entire order. Once again, go to link in the show notes or the description below and use code Chris Griffin and kit your wardrobe out and get some new clothes for you to wear at the gym or on your Sunday long run. I'm going to go to the gym, but you guys get straight back into this episode. People get addicted to holding the commitments they set to themselves. But the reason they do is because they trick themselves into thinking it's a good thing because it's masked with something healthy. like eating healthy food, never going to, like you see the people that are full whole foods, nothing else.
Yeah.
And I experienced it firsthand. I lived with the most famous ones in Australia last year. And you see the progression of how it goes. You first cut out oils, and then you cut out processed sugar, and then you slowly lead in, and then all of a sudden you get to a point where you beat yourself up if you are eating anything that's not steak and pumpkin, whatever it is, right? And it's this progression that goes down, but it's masked as a positive thing because they go, oh, you're so disciplined and healthy. But I go, you can't even eat a Christmas glazed turkey or ham because it's got sugar in the glazing.
Yeah.
And you go, and that's healthy? And you see the progression in people that are doing extremities in fitness. This is what I was deep diving with Meg and Will about, like people like Nick doing the 100,000 mile things. I go, it's great that you're doing this feat, and it's awesome that people can get inspired to take leaps on their own. But I worry about I don't worry about it, but the negative to it is you get addicted to holding the commitments to yourself. So then when a little thought floats in your mind, like, oh, maybe I should do this, that's locked now.
Yep.
You've had that little thought float in your mind. You can't get over that thought. And now you're not going to be satisfied unless you complete that thing. And it could be so extreme. Or I'm going to commit to holding an ice bath every single day. And if there's no ice bath, you're going to figure out. And if you don't, you're going to get proper beaten up. There was a guy I was hanging out with in Austin, and he does extremities, and we did a beep test, and we did like this beep test at the track. And
football test?
Like a beep test where you like beep.
Yeah,
beep,
it's hard.
Yeah.
Very hard.
And I beat him in the beep test and got like a high number. And he was like in the moment, like, yeah, like fair play, you beat me, X, Y, and Z. And this guy's a guy, like he's ran every day for like the last 3,000 days or something like this. And anyway, he was like fair play in the moment. The next day, he didn't tell me or anything. He went and ran the beep test himself again without telling me. And he got one beep higher than me in the test and did it on his own. Some would say that that's a positive thing. He was like, oh, I'm going to prove to myself that I'm capable of doing that. I did the beep test, got on with my day, went and had a beer out on 6th Street and watched the comedy, whatever. He then went there. He's probably beating himself up that he's like not done this, got demons in his head and goes and beats it. It's fine. Like, cool. Some could see that as positive, but I go, it's much deeper than that. I think you've got to a point where you've got some extreme demons in your head and there's a lot of positive to it. You achieve so many great things, but there's also this level of like lack of peace of mind that I feel like you might have to go through as well.
You got to pick your poison, dude. You got to pick your poison. And if that's the poison that you want to drink every single day, which is just like that hierarchy of insane competitiveness over drugs or over something else, maybe it's your thing. And I can't speak from a place where I can say like, oh, I know better, because I'm in it. Yeah, I'm in a loop, as I said to you. Like I catch myself all the time where like even a couple years ago, I remember I lost the world championship and then I lost the next race. And I was still in this moment of just like kind of basking in the idea of not wanting to do it anymore. And it was like I got kicked in the nuts once and I was like, ow. And then I got kicked in the nuts second time and it spun me out into this insane version of myself. And then I went on to set world record, world record, world record, world title, world title, world title. And it was just explosive. And most people would look at that and say, wow, that's insane. And I'm right back in the same loop again. I lost the world title. I lost the second one. And I can already catch myself just with the way that like I write things, do things, say things, feel things. And it's 3 years later, but I'm right back in the same exact place. Some amazing things are going to come of this. But if I don't handle it a little bit differently the second time around, there's definitely some downfalls that I'm going to end up right back in the same exact place where I was last time. So I don't know. Speaking from a standpoint of just being aware is probably the best thing I can say.
That's the best thing, aware. Yeah. Because I'm in it too, where if I set like myself that I'm doing 3 dead hangs today at the end of my session for a minute 20 or whatever it is, and my hands are ripping because I've just been doing all this other grip strength stuff. Like if I don't do the 3 on that session, like, and I leave, I've got like I've got these like battle in my head. I'm like, fuck, I should have just done it. Like I should have just done it. I could have done it. I'm not going to die.
Why dead hangs?
Well, it's just an example.
Okay, I
Like,
was about to say, I was like,
no, it's just an example. Like,
Yep.
it's like I would just do dead hangs just like at the end of my sessions, just because it's just like one of those things, grip strength, hanging, all the stuff. But yeah, it's a weird thing with mindset. And I just challenge sometimes because like I'm in that state too with so many things I'm doing. And I think it's one of the very reasons why I've got to where I am. You said like all the amazing things you achieve is probably from that drive of going like fuck, I've been hit again. I've got to prove, I've got to like strive and get better and better. And so then you achieve something great, then you get the recognition and everything. I just often question like, where's the line, especially when it's masked with something so positive. Just in terms of hard work, you mentioned it just before, you mentioned that there was a key moment that happened in your life that you learnt a lesson about hard work and everything changed.
Yeah.
When was that?
So when I was in that rehab, I'd gotten kicked out of 3 rehabs now, and I got originally back to the original first one, and I was on the verge of going to jail because I kept on failing drug tests, getting kicked out of rehabs. I wasn't really playing by the rules. That's another story. But basically, I got back and I told my program officer, I was like, listen, man, I need to do something that is so hard that it is going to wreck me and prevent me from having this energy of just wanting to go out and get fucked and just create problems. I just couldn't help myself. The same amount of energy that you see that I put into this training was put towards just bad behavior.
You're also on all the medications still, I'm assuming?
Yes. I was court ordered at that point in time. I started to figure it out where I was hiding the drugs between my fingers and stuff, and I would throw it out, and I was really getting away from it because I was like, this doesn't make any sense, dude. Like, I do not need these drugs. But
which drugs were you on at the time?
I believe at the time I was on what was called Dexedrine, which is like a very potent kind of meth-based product that is supposed to help you with ADHD, attention deficit disorder, hyperactive disorder for me. And I was also being given bipolar medication, which is supposed to create non-manic behavior in the way where there's swings of just like extreme excitement or opportunist, like extreme depression.
So just numbed your feelings basically.
Oh, dude, like I'll never forget as a kid, this is where I knew, and I was very young, and I knew that these people did not have my life,
best interests at heart.
Yeah, not at all. Like it basically was just not a good thing. They had me on this Dexedrine stuff that was so powerful. Like I was taking 80 to 100 milligrams where most people take 20, and I was a kid. I picked up a tic where I would just scratch my head all day long. And I looked at all the pictures when I was younger, and I could see it where our class pictures were up on the wall. And every single time there was a picture of me, I had my hand in my head. Like it was very bizarre. And I picked a hole in my head to the point where it pussed out and became this huge scab on top of my head. And I just had this clarity. I was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you look so weird. You're going to be remembered for the rest of your life as the kid who picks his head. Like I just was it was just such a weird thing where it snapped over me. And I was like, this is it. So I started to bite my fingers to the point where they would bleed anytime I caught my finger in my head, and I was able to break that habit. But I remember also they gave me this bipolar medication. I sat there and the doctors were sitting across from my parents, and they were basically like, so he's going to take this medication, and if he doesn't take it every single day, if he misses days, it could really do damage to his liver. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, it can put holes in your liver. And I was like, what? And everyone's like, yeah, he'll take it. And my parents were like, yeah, he'll take it. And I was like, you guys are accepting the fact that I'm going to take pills that could potentially put holes in my liver if I miss a day? I was like, you two are fucking idiots. Like, you're going to, I guarantee you're going to forget to give me pills one of these days, because my family was divorced. I would go to my dad's house and my mom's house, and it was so easy for us to just forget that bag that had the medication in it. I was like, I'm going to be the one as like a 10, 12-year-old kid accountable for this shit. I was like, no way.
Is that how old you were?
Oh, dude, this stuff started when I was like 8 to 10. So fast forward now, I'm in this rehab, and I basically told my program officer, I was like, dude, I'm on the edge of going back to jail. I was like, I can't control myself. I know it's going to happen again. Get me a hard job. Do something. Because all I could think of was the only thing that would kind of subdue me back in the day was wrestling practice or track practice, because I'd go out there and just max out. And he's like, all right, I'll get you a job. So he called somebody who used to work with who had drug addiction, and he was a logger in Montana. So I went up into the mountains of Montana. They gave me this job where now I was working in the mountains, thousands of meters up in the sky, helping chopping down trees that were, 30 plus meters, 50 meters tall. And literally, I was working this job and I totally sucked. I was like a young 19-year-old weak kid. I hadn't really gotten big and strong yet. This whole job transformed me, by the way.
And you had already been in jail.
I hadn't been in jail. Like I kept on getting arrested. You get detained, you get brought into a jail, but you don't stay there because you'd have to then get convicted and get jail time. But instead, every single time I went into court, they would seem to find a way to send me to anger management or do these classes or now go to rehab. So I'm doing my job and effectively like I was the weakest man on the job because I was the newest guy. And one day my boss pulled me aside and he goes, on this mountain, there's myself, who's the sawyer who chops down the trees. There's the crane operator who pulls all the logs up. There's the hooker, who's you, who loops the logs with the lines. There's the knot bumper who lets them go up top next to the crane. There's the truck drivers that drive all the trucks, the wood away. And he goes, if someone's going slow, it slows down the next person. And if everybody's slowed down, then we lose contracts. And if we lose contracts, we lose money. And if we lose money, we lose jobs. So basically, he was kind of trying to tell me I'm about to get fired. And he's like, there's what we call the bull of the mountain. And I was like, what's that? And he goes, it's the guy who's running the pace. This guy is so strong and so powerful that everybody else has to keep up with him. If I'm chopping down the trees quickly, you guys have to get the crane over there ASAP and get the logs. So I'm the one who's running the pace. I'm the bull of the mountain. If you're the hooker and you're hooking up logs so fast, guess what? The crane operator has to be on point, get those logs up there. So does the knot bumper. So does the truck driver. Because you're moving wood so fast, you got to get the truck up there. You got to get that wood off the mountain because it's getting in the way of the next line. And I was like, oh, so you're saying I could be that guy? He's like, yeah, why not? Why don't you work a little harder? Why don't you be the guy that everybody's looking up to? And it was the first time anybody who had explained hard work to me or the reason why hard work may potentially lead to a little respect. Because right now I'm the young guy and all I wanted was these guys' respect. And now all of a sudden, dude, I cannot even explain it to you, but it was like a light switch that went off. And overnight, my mind, my body, everything transformed. I wanted to be that person so badly. And I'll never forget, I showed up the next day to work and I was just running up and down the mountain, boom, boom, hammering, dragging these fucking cords that are so heavy and so hard to pull, just ripping it over and over and over again. And now all of a sudden I recognized how everybody was looking at me. I was no longer the person they'd come over and bitch at. They were just like, nice job. They'd give me a cigarette and all that kind of stuff. It changed immediately. And it wasn't like I needed validation. It was just this level of just respect, awareness, some kind of level playing field here where I'd always felt like I was the lowest man on the totem pole coming from a family where I was the smallest kid and coming from a place where I was not that great in school, just kind of always being middle of the road at best.
And more controlling you as well with the medication and all the things where you could finally feel like you're actually equal playing field with everyone.
Yeah. So
or better.
Whatever it was, man, that shifted my life. And from that point on, I just recognized that if I'm the person who's willing to show up and work harder than everybody else, not just stupid, but hard, really get after it efforts, you could own it. You can own anything. And it translated into sport, business, anything I put my hands on. I mean, it was great to me to be so young and probably do the hardest job in America at the time, which is just moving lumber. It's risky, it's heavy, it's hard, it's cold, and it was transformative.
Do you think it was the first time you felt like you were respected?
Probably. I mean, respect is one of those kind of things where it was yeah, I'm sure I received it when I was younger for some kind of thing or accolade or something that I did well. I would win races and stuff and people wow, that's really great. But there was never a really tight crew like this. This was a very tight crew of men on the mountains. And the respect I would get would be from parents or teachers or some of the kids in my class. Nobody I looked up to. These men were beasts and I looked up to them. They were my superiors. And I was it was the first time ever that I had felt that somebody beyond me was now equal to me, if not feeling that I had surpassed them. And it wasn't this kind of thing where I was hey man, I got one over on you. It was just I'm here now, witness it.
And so you were 19, 20 at that time?
19, I just turned.
19 you just turned.
Yeah.
You said that the running amok kind of went all the way up till 23 when things started to change.
Yeah, it was a mess.
What happened after the logging and then kept going into this thing, and then talk to me about when things all changed?
I mean, dude, that could be such a long story, but I'll try to give you the abbreviated version. Basically, I went back to college. My parents told me, like, you got to go back to school. And that was kind of just the natural transition for everybody. Like, nowadays, everybody could basically start an e-commerce business off their iPhone with Shopify, and there's so many other opportunities. But at least almost 20 years ago, the only option was really like, go to school, go learn something, and then go apply yourself. So my parents sent me to school. It was not a good fit for me at all because it was back into the same situation and routines I was in before, where I was just told to take classes for things that were not applicable or value to my life at all. Like, they gave me, I wanted to go become the crocodile hunter. That was my dream job. Like, I sat down with the counselor, and they're like, so what classes do you want to take? I was like, I want to be the crocodile hunter. They're like, we don't have classes for that, obviously. So they gave me anthropology classes, which are so boring. And so I wasn't doing class now. And I was on academic probation, so they wouldn't let me compete in sport. So I basically had just, now all of a sudden the next transition in my life was, because I couldn't compete, all I could do was train. So I will never forget my first workout. Like, I went down and I had to start training because they wouldn't let me on the practice mats. So I started lifting weights, and now all of a sudden I started running in the hills, and I started to see that everybody on the team was witnessing how fit I was getting. And it became this kind of vanity project where I started to learn about bodybuilding and building my strength up, all this kind of stuff. Because my body started to transform so well, I started to get attention from the girls. I didn't just get attention from girls. I got a modeling contract. Now all of a sudden I was traveling the world modeling. I didn't care about modeling. I didn't know anything about modeling. I can barely take a picture now because it's just a weird experience to sit still and have somebody capture you. And I did that for a while, but it was more because I didn't know what to do and I was getting attention now. So it was more of just this thing that was keeping me afloat. During this time as being a model, like, you're obviously working out with a lot of other fit guys that are all kind of just six packs, arms, abs, all that kind of shit. We'd go out for runs, or we would do like a workout together, and I would smoke everybody, and they'd be like, dude, you're so fit. And I'm like, whatever. And, I'd run with them in the park. I would crush everybody. So I'll admit, like, I'd never wanted to compete. I was told to. All of a sudden, a competitive spark started to come up in me where I was like, well, what would it be like if I ran again? And like, out of nowhere, I'll never forget, I signed up for my first Spartan race because my friend challenged me. Spartan race at the time was kind of a cheesy thing. You couldn't even tell it was a competitive side. And I went and signed up, ran in my underpants and a pair of tube socks and a bandana with some beers. We had been drinking beers that morning. I came sixth place out of 10,000 people. And it was that thing again where it hit, where I could feel that drug kind of like hit my vein a little bit. And I was like, whoa. Everyone's like, dude, sixth place out of 10,000 people? Are you sure this is right? And I'm like, yeah. I was like, okay, all right. And then all of a sudden I signed up for a half marathon. I'd never run over 5 miles in my life. I beat everybody, and everyone's like, whoa, dude. And I was like, okay. And now all of a sudden I just kind of like use the vanity aspect of it to drive me deeper and deeper into the competitive side of it. And then all of a sudden I started just blindly believing in myself. I was like, well, I took sixth place and I took first place. I was like, who's the world champion in this sport? So I just typed his name in, said Hobie Call, and I was like, I'm going to beat him.
Beat him.
I didn't even think about it. I didn't think about who number 2, 3, 4, 5, 500th was. I never looked up anybody else's name. I looked at the world champion. And I was like, I'll beat him. And I did. And I showed up again. And I beat the next guy. And I beat the next guy. And I beat the next guy. And all of a sudden it was like, it was no longer a question of whether or not I was competing. It was like, who's going to try to beat me? Who thinks they can beat me? And it was just this massive transition from like, pretty much had no prospects in life and was considered pretty much the next problem anywhere I went. No one would show up for me. No one wanted me there. I mean, I'll never forget, my parents didn't let me over at their houses for a while. Like my dad would come down and meet me at a restaurant at the corner of his apartment and wouldn't let me up into his house. And my mom didn't want me around. And not like I'm saying boo-hoo, but like nobody wanted me around. I was that big of a problem. To the point where all of a sudden people are calling me up. And they're like, Hunter, can we please fly you in? Will you come do this race? And I was like, okay. And looking back on that now, at the time, it was a point of vanity and like acceptance. But at the same time, like I'll tell anybody this, when you get into the real world, the big world, and you're outside of the, the secure eyes of your parents and people who are taking care of you because you're at that point in your life, like you need to show up as somebody who presents value. Like if you come knock on my door and you're like, Hunter, can I come in? I'm like, who's the person on the other side of that door? And why would I value inside of my house? I had become somebody who is so dangerous and such an issue and risk that nobody wanted me there. And I could tell, like my girlfriends didn't want me. Like I was just a risk. And now there's pretty much not a place I can go in the world that, has fitness at all involved in their community that wouldn't just beg to have me there. And I created that through tons and tons of hard work so that I was a value add rather than a value take. And, I never really did my life from that perspective, but I do understand the value of it now where I'm like, God damn, man, like no wonder you got as bad as you were because you were such a risk.
Yeah.
And like looking back now, if my daughter met a kid like that, I'd be like, don't hang out with him. Don't. Let that kid figure his shit out before he comes in this house.
Yeah.
So I had to figure my shit out. It took a long time.
Yeah, and I think that winner's mentality where you say, I don't care about second, third, or fourth. I want the winner, and I'm going to beat him.
Yeah.
And that even showed when someone asked you the question at the thing, when someone asked you the question, oh, why do you do the broad jumps with the jump instead of the step up? And you're like, what one's quicker? You're like, there's only one world champion. And it's like, that one's quicker, so I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that shows the winning mentality. But then the second thing as well is there's that saying around hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard.
Yeah.
But the addition to that is when talent works hard, everyone's fucked. It's like being able to identify that you're talented at something and then putting the hard work to the thing that you're gifted at. It's like, fuck, that's where winners are made. It's in that little recipe. And in and around all of that time, you got this tattoo on your back.
Yeah.
When did you get that and why?
So I was in that rehab, as I said, and things started to get pretty bad. Like, I'm in rehab and I'm starting to do more drugs. Like, I think the big issue with rehabs, if for somebody who is in the position that I was in, is that now all of a sudden you are with professional drug doers. You aren't with, recreational drug doers. You're with people that fucking love drugs, that they know how to get high better than anybody else. They know where to inject it. They know how much to put in. They know when to do it, why to do it, what to mix it with to get all the best highs. And, I was the big party animal in my school. And now I'm like low man on the totem pole in this room full of these people that are injecting their dicks with heroin to keep themselves high. Like, it was crazy. So I had upped my like, oh, I'm going to snort some coke and snort some heroin to like, I'm injecting it now because that's a better way of getting high. How did I learn that? From the other people in the rehab. And I had started injecting it and I was like, I'm fucked. Like I'm taking it so far. Like they've already told me I'm going to jail if I don't make it out of here. Passing their tests. So, and I'm just blowing it all away. I'm pissing dirty all the time. I'm getting kicked out of rehab to rehab. I'm like, I'm so fucked. And I sat on the couch one day after like sobering up. I was like, oh my God, dude, like, what do I do? I'm so much trouble. I was like, I have to get out of here. I have to create some level of just an absolute promise to myself that I'll break these habits. So I sat there with myself. I'm like, what's the only thing I've ever really valued, like thought was cool, like really cool? And I remember the Navy SEAL recruiters would come into our wrestling camps and they would try to recruit us at tournaments. And they'd be like, yeah, do you want to jump out of airplanes and hold big guns and protect your country? And I'm like, well, yeah, sure. Why not? And they're like, yeah, you'd be the fittest, the toughest, the most elite in the world. And I was like, yeah, cool. Sounds good. Jump out of planes? I was like, yeah, I'll do that. So I was like, I could do that. I could do that. And I'm like, I'm not going to tell people I'm going to do it. I'm going to fucking tattoo it on my back. I'm going to ink my entire body with a promise to myself that I'm going to make it into the Navy SEALs. So the emblem of the trident is on the Navy SEAL pen, and it's kind of like that's the face of their program. Frogmen, trident, all these things. And I was like, just put it on your back, dude. You can't hide from this anymore. Like, you need to promise. And I can't just like tell you, like, bro, I think I'm going to go. Like, no, look at my back. This is a promise. 2 hours of just getting drilled into my back with ink. So I stopped. I stopped doing drugs all the way until I got out of rehab. And I cleaned up my act for about 5 months, 5 months and 29 days. I think it was what I made clean. And I get out and, just to button up the story, like, it worked. It was a promise. I leave it on there now just to remind myself from where I was to where I am now. But basically, I went and did that year of school. I tried to sign up for the Navy. I got in and I was sworn in for 2 days, but I lied about everything, about me being arrested, me doing drugs. I went through the tests, passed all the tests, did great on the tests. And then 2 days into being in the military, they found out about my record through a second screening test, and done. So I never got in, but probably for the best if I had to think about it. But it got me through.
But the thing is the person you became by doing that was someone probably capable of the military and the Navy SEAL, but the reason that didn't go through was the record, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's that realization that it's actually not about the goal. It's about who you became to get to that goal, in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Because you're looking at it and going, yeah, it's probably a blessing you didn't make it. But the tattoo was the start. It was that gateway that led you down the path to where you actually are now, which is the character that you've built, which you're proud of, in a sense.
Sure. And you can definitely see that there's a habit with me where these extremes, these hard promises, these very defining moments where I'm on cliff's edge and I'm either going to fall off or I'm going to double down. And that's my whole life, what it's been built on. Like, as I just said to you, like, I lost this year. Guess what? Like, that was me on cliff's edge. I was just about to fall off and just say, do I quit or do I come back into this thing and cook the fire even hotter and build something even sharper than it's ever been before? And much like we were talking about earlier, this is probably one of these addictive loops that I have that has created a tremendous amount of prosperity and a lot of people that would look at me as like a very respected, person to be sought after. But I definitely get better at witnessing these things, catching on to it, looking back and like telling these stories to you right now. Like, it's kind of crazy to me. I'm like, fuck, I did that again. I did it again. But I'm grateful, man. Like, I'm a man of extremes, and you'll probably know me for a long time. You're probably going to find these extremes over and over again, but it's built me to who I am. I'm grateful. And I've definitely got a lot of work to do in the way that I want to make these things become a little bit more impactful rather than just for myself, but for other people. Like, I live a very selfish lifestyle in the way that I can only really focus my energy inward to be able to get these outcomes. But as I transition, that's probably the next thing I'm going to focus on, is being able to spread it outward.
It's very cool. Would you say you have any regrets?
I don't know, man. Like, I think having regrets is one of these kind of things where it's like, even your regrets are part of who you are now, to even have the perspective that you had a regret. You know what I mean?
What do you mean by that? Say that one more time.
Well, it's the reality. It's like, if you didn't crash into something and get that extreme experience of the feeling back, would you really have absorbed the lesson? So like, some of like the biggest regrets of like saying something to a girl that I was madly in love with that may have really hurt her feelings, would I have ever really understood the magnitude of it if I didn't go through it? And pulling that fire alarm that eventually was the thing that became the piece that sent me into rehab, if I hadn't pulled it, would I have gone into those places and really learned about myself that deeply at such a young age to give me such hardcore perspective that would allow me to build such an incredible career based off of something like, I don't want to ever go back there. So I'm going to run so far away from it at such a hard pace that it's going to build this person. And yeah, like, looking at things and be like, I wish I never did that. I think that's a mistake. I think you have to have enough perspective to understand that that regret is who you are now. If you don't grow because of these regrets, that's on you.
So where the regret comes from is if you aren't proud of who you see in the mirror, so you're not proud of who you've become, you'll have regret. Because the reason the regret's there is because you want to change something. But if you're proud of who you are, you don't want to change anything that you've done.
No, you don't want to repeat yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between if you were to go back and relive it again, you would make a different decision. Of course you would. You're more wise now. You know different things. But you actually can't do that. So if you're focusing on changing something that's happened, that you can't change, that's regret. But if you're proud of who you are, then you shouldn't actually have any regret because everything's made you to who you are. As you said, seek the answers, learnt the biggest lessons through the hardest times that some people would regret going through or doing.
Yeah. Like I don't want to live a life where I've got the bumper lanes on when I'm bowling. Like I need to have some risk. I need to end up in the gutter to be able to get back and really align myself. And that's like 100%. If you ever just watched me and were able to catalog everything I've done, it's always the gutter that makes me the greatest. It really is. And like, I've just always had that where I was able to dive in, head into everything with no holdbacks and then come back out with either a gold medal or a really harsh lesson that would eventually turn into one.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah. Dude, I appreciate you, man. What's next? What's happening in life?
Oh, dude. I mean, like I'm on competition tour, which is awesome. Brisbane this weekend, tomorrow. 2 weeks after that. Yeah. Tomorrow. Crazy. So I'm going to go hard in Brisbane. 2 weeks later, I go compete in Glasgow. That's the last major of the season. Then I go back, may have one more competition in Miami, and then I'm off to Worlds. And it's like one of these kind of things where every single day becomes more and more important and impactful in the ultimate outcome, which is going to be, the world title again. So these days are honestly peaceful. It's really nice to be able to walk down to the beach and just go watch the waves as the sun rises. So I'm going to really soak up this moment, and this is going to be the cookie that I kind of have in my pocket that I'll nibble on every once in a while just to remind myself how good it is once the days get dark. But I'm grateful, dude. I'm really grateful that I have the time and capabilities to be out here and be able to connect with some new people and do some new stuff.
Yeah, it's good to have you in Australia, man, and hopefully you spend some more time here over the years.
I'm back, dude. I'm definitely coming back.
Yeah, I appreciate you, man. I just want to commend you for everything you're doing. It's so cool. It's so inspiring. I think I'm hearing stories of like people going through extreme challenges or like even just like the rehab thing, the prescription drugs that your parents are saying yes to, and I'm like going through all of these things and not really feeling understood to then getting to where you are today. It's like the coolest thing. And I feel like the greatest part and a key denominator of everyone that's achieving so many great things is that they've had these rock bottoms. It's not been smooth sailing because, as we said, we've grown the most from those, and you've definitely done that. So I appreciate you coming on the show, and yeah, thank you for sharing the time.
Of course, dude. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. And I'll leave all of Hunter's details in the show notes in the description below so you guys can go and check him out for yourself, follow along the journey. He's also got this like polarizing character, which I think is something we didn't dive into today, but you look at all of the great athletes that have made real noise is like there's something outside of just their ability in sport and building someone that's likable, and you're definitely on that path, which is really cool. So go and check him out. And if you've made it to the end, screenshot this and post it on your story and tag us just to let us know you've made it to the end of the podcast so we can show you our appreciation, and leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple because it helps the show grow, helps us keep getting amazing people just like Hunter back on the show we're going to sign out for this week. But I'll see you next week. See you guys.